Well, Matt, it's a pleasure to see you.
Nice to see you, Paul. Nice to meet you finally.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. I've enjoyed your videos actually for quite a while. I discovered your channel maybe a couple of years ago.
All right, on.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate you sending me a note. And I rewatched your conversation with Jonathan Peugeot, which I thought was fascinating. And yeah, so it's just getting things all kind of set for me here. It's how are you weathering these strange times?
I'm really enjoying it. I have to say that just being home with the family has been great, and going on walks, evening walks together with everyone. I just really enjoy it. I think I saw a statistic that said like 80% of all Americans feel like they're close to their families now,
Yeah.
and I think that's the upside of this. It's really been wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. I just was walking to work this morning and saw a father, and I assume a father and two small children walking down the street, and you just haven't seen that much, and now you
Yeah,
see it quite commonly. So,
yeah, it's pretty extraordinary.
well, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll jump into wherever this goes.
Okay. I am. Well, hold on. Can I see if I can try to minimize my picture because I don't like looking at myself.
Okay.
Is there a possibility of doing that? I'm not sure how to do
There's
that.
a setting. If you move your mouse over the screen, there's speaker view
Oh,
and the
much
other
better.
view, and you can switch back and forth.
There we go. That's much better. I kept jumping in, showing my face, and I'm like, I don't want to see myself. So you're asking me who I am?
Yeah, introduce yourself a little bit for those who don't know who you are.
Okay, well, I'm Matthew Miller of Logos Made Flesh. I have a YouTube channel called Logos Made Flesh. It existed long before the YouTube channel. I had a blog that I started back in probably, I don't know, the tens, or whatever you call them, the aughts. So about 2006 or so, I started this blog, and just my thoughts, just like you started yours. I mean, just these random thoughts. It's like a means to get out in front of you the things that you have inside your head, and to wrestle with those ideas without anybody, judging you or whatever. And so that's where it all started. Just some ideas that I had, but it goes back further than that. I started. I don't know what you want me to say about myself, but
I usually do a lot of autobiography on this channel, so you can go all the way back to the home you grew up in.
okay. So
Raised in a Christian home?
yep, raised in a Christian home. My mom and dad come from two very vastly different worlds. My mom was raised in a Christian home, conservative Dutch convert who came to the United States in 1950, got saved here in a Pentecostal church, and started his own church. And so she was raised by a pastor, and had who read the Bible every Sunday after meal times, or actually after meal times in general. They would have a time together. And so very traditional, very conservative home. My dad came from an alcoholic home. He is the bastard son of an adulterous affair,
Wow.
and did not find that out until he was probably 30 years old, but had suspicions of it. So of four kids, he's the only one who's not the biological child of his father.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, but about the age of 13, 14, he was invited to go to a church service by someone who felt led of the Lord to invite his brother to a church service. And the Millers were not, they were the kids from the wrong side of the tracks. So they weren't the ones that you traditionally do, but the guy felt like he was called by the Lord to invite this particular, my uncle Larry, to a church service. And my dad said, I'd like to go too. Let's see what it's all about. And he got saved.
Wow.
And the whole family went the following week, and they all got saved. So from an abusive, alcoholic family, totally turned around, and saw things change in his own life. And my dad became an evangelist, basically, and he has characterized his life as telling stories and going out. He became a teen evangelist. He counselor, teen suicide prevention counselor. He goes around and spoke at seminars throughout the whole entire United States. So he's spoken like 3 million teens or something like that in high schools and all that. So he's done remarkably well for himself. So that's my background. So very different home, very different perspectives.
How did the how did the conversions and entrance into the church change what was going on in your father's family that he grew up in? Was there a big transformation?
Yeah, I think my grandfather, I mean, as far as the stories that I've told, gave up alcohol obviously right away, and then smoking. I think for a time, I think he probably went back to it, but you know. I don't think it healed all the damage that was done, but like I said, the family became something different, something it hadn't been. And about the time my dad was 17, 18, he was still on his way out. And so he ended up with his brothers moving out here. They were from Michigan. It was Detroit that he grew up in. Mm-hmm. They moved to Missouri. And then from Missouri, my dad moved out here with his brothers just to see what they could find. Which is, I live in Washington State. Okay. So they basically went on an adventure just to see where the road would take them. And he planted himself here. My grandparents followed for a time with all my uncles and my aunt, and they eventually left and moved to Florida. So I haven't been close to them for a very long time. Okay. So my dad's been kind of just his own person. So that side of the family just really don't know that well. But my dad, distinct and unique and everything like that. We just recently found, the biological, my biological grandfather. So
really?
Through my genetic testing and things like that, which
wow.
my dad wasn't seeking, but my sisters were. So we found that information out. So
how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have 3 sisters. I grew up I grew up basically, my dad was on the road a lot and always in his hand in some kind of pie somewhere. And so he was around, but I really grew up with my mom and my 3 sisters. And my mom is really, I would say, of the 2, my father and my mother, she is the real prayer warrior and the spiritual influence on my life. Not to say my dad he has a spiritual influence, but he's more the rational, the talky, the argumentative, that side of me. And the other one's the more emotional, the more, actually my dad can be, in his storytelling, can be quite emotional, but my mom really, I mean, she sings, she plays the piano, and she wrote a children's musical. Has done some wonderful things. So she would read the Bible to us every morning as we went off to school. You know, even when we were just brushing our teeth and getting ready for school, she'd be reading the Bible. So I knew the Bible, apart from my reading it myself. I knew it fairly well by the time I graduated from high school. So.
Okay. Now you mentioned to Jonathan Peugeot that you wound up going to Bible college. How did that come about?
Well, I got saved, my own conversion, my personal conversion, about the age of 13. And I say, I probably accepted the Lord, I don't know, 2 or 3, 4 or 5, half a dozen times before I actually felt like I made a real conversion. Mm-hmm. About 7th grade, obviously, just like everyone else, I didn't have a sense of identity, a sense of self, trying to figure out who I am. And I wanted to fit in and be popular and everything like that. Mm-hmm. And obviously in that setting, that personal struggle, I mean, it was really pretty deep at the time. I ended up going chasing after girls, trying to find a girlfriend. Yeah. My girlfriend who I got, she was a 9th grader. I was a 7th grader. Very cool. I thought I was really awesome. And then she found out I was a 7th grader and dumped me. I thought I could get her back. So she was on a trip going down to Mexico on a missions trip. And I said, I'd like to go on this missions trip too. And I asked my parents to borrow the money, and they gave me the money because they thought, well, I mean, God's good. So they sent me on this mission trip to Mexico. And I grew up Pentecostal. So, I mean, my grandfather was Pentecostal. My dad was Pentecostal. So, we had this idea of speaking in tongues in our denomination. And so for me, that was something I always tried to mimic. I heard services and people praying for and stuff like that. Something I just felt like, it never felt like it was real. Always felt like it was made up, and I didn't quite know how it worked or anything like that. We went on this mission trip to Mexico, and I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling like rejected by this girl, and I start just gravitating. My heart starts just gravitating towards God. Like, God, you hold the answers, and whatever you want from my life, you make that a reality. So, sorry.
That's okay.
So anyway, started praying that prayer. And I remember sitting in an empty room, and right before we went to Mexico, we went down to LA. It was a YWAM base down there in LA. Yeah. And we're hanging out there, I think the night or 2 before we go down to actually cross over into Mexico to Tijuana to build a house or do whatever. Yeah. And I was in an empty room, and I remember praying that prayer, God, just fill me with your Holy Spirit if you want me to have it. And it was quiet, it was silent, and nothing happened. And I said, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Whatever you want.
Yeah.
So, So anyway, the next night, we had this kind of time together with a bunch of different churches, bunch of, different denominations had come together to do this, different things down in Mexico. And we were all training in this YWAM base. And we all were showing what we had learned in the week that we've been there preparing to go down, and or the few days. And what did I do? Anyway, so at that night, it was kind of a worship service, and I felt like God was asking, wanted me to receive the Holy Spirit, that, maybe that was the time. And I remember walking out, nothing happened. There was, Baptists, different denominations there who don't quite see it the same way we do.
Yeah.
I remember going out, and a guy who was with me, 16-year-old, I was 13 years old at the time. He was telling my youth pastor, he said, I felt like we should have had this, prayer time for that tonight. And I said, I did too. And, so we ended up going back to my our cabin, and he said, a friend of mine, another person who just got radically saved like the year before, said, hey, we're going to pray for you tonight.
Yeah.
So in the same quiet room, the room that I'd been in the night before, we just stood up and held hands, about 4 or 5 guys.
Yeah.
No music, no repetitive prayer, nothing that was hyping us up or anything like that. Just a genuine.
It's okay. It's okay.
Just a genuine longing for the Spirit's presence. And boy, I experienced it in such a powerful way that obviously it's changed my life forever. And I knew at that time, I knew that it was real. And no one could shake it from me. It was like, the light switch had gone on and it couldn't be turned off. So anyway, that's where it all starts from. Okay. But I'm also a person that wrestled with doubt. And I would say the doubts came probably within a year and a half, where it was fairly radical. And I felt like I was fairly sure and confident of the thing that I knew so well. And yet the doubts came. And so wrestling with what I knew and what I didn't know, and how I knew the things that I knew, became a lifelong quest to try to wrestle with these ideas and to help others see, because I really wanted others to see. It was my heart's desire to say, this joy that I have, man, I want other people to experience that too. So, so that's where it kind of all springs from. So that's what led me to Bible college. Just the desire to, have other people see and experience this joy and this new life, this forgiveness, everything. And so to be able to understand the Bible, to be able to, if it, it indeed is God's word, it's the most important thing that's ever hit the world. It's important news that needs to be shared with everybody. And I want to know it so deeply and intimately that I can share it with others. So that's what led me to Multnomah Bible College, which is here in Portland. So,
So what'd you do after Bible college?
Well, yeah, I went to Bible college and kind of sojourned there for about 9 years in college. In the meantime, I got married, had some kids, did some youth pastoring. Didn't quite know where I was heading. I thought about going into film. I thought about, being a pastor. I bounced around between a lot of different ideas. Didn't quite know how I was supposed to work that all out. So just sucking up everything for a long time. So eventually, I would say probably about 2003, I came back from school down in Biola, because I'd moved down to California, Southern California, to go to film school at Biola University. I came back up and got a job at Clark County Sheriff's Office, where I've been a corrections deputy for the past 17 years. So I work, so I make money and I make a living, and it's a good living. But it's not, it's not what my heart's desire is. And but at the same time, it's afforded me an opportunity to see the world in a way that I wouldn't have any other way. So see real people, see people where they're at, and in some pretty crazy, insane, and ways. So
no, I really appreciate that. One of my favorite jobs I ever had was a campus cop.
Oh
yeah. My uncle was a career police officer on Long Island. It's kind of the two. In my family, people are either preachers or cops, it seems. And I know I'm not going to mention his name, but I know a guy. He's a world-class theologian, brilliant man from a brilliant family. Family's just full of just off the chart, brilliant people. This person's son went into law enforcement, and I remember him telling me, he says, I think my son's doing this to get his stories for when he decides to write.
Yeah.
Because and my own church here is, just walking in now, I have a fair number of dealings with homeless people. It's the kind of the neighborhood that this church is in. And my father's congregation, my father was a pastor, my grandfather was a pastor. And there's a veneer of an American culture that is usually presented by, I think in a lot of ways, television and especially commercial, that kind of a commercial image that gets presented, that life is somehow stable and reliable and everybody has enough money and everyone is beautiful, and that's normal in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I appreciate about ministering in a community like this, and law enforcement jobs and counseling jobs and pastoring, is that image is a lie.
Mm-hmm.
That normal scales from, you can find normal at the mall, but you also find normal in the county jail.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you find a lot of normal in the county jail.
Yeah.
And so there's a reality to that helps disbelieve the projected normality promoted by a consumerist society, whose real interest underneath is to just, relieve people of their discretionary income. But so I when I again, when we were talking via Twitter message, and then when I re-listened to Jonathan Peugeot's your talk with Jonathan Peugeot, I really appreciate that aspect of your story. And I want to get into a little bit how your blog and then your YouTube channel started. But I think actually your day job is probably a really important piece of the giftedness you're exhibiting on your channel.
Oh.
Because you are not, and even one of the things I appreciate about the Pentecostal church, really all over the world — I was a foreign missionary before I came back to North America — is the Pentecostal church is about the most racially diverse, socioeconomically diverse. The Pentecostal church in some ways cuts through all of the demographic layers in North America in a way that no other church really does. Mm-hmm. And I think there are reasons for that, which I won't go into now. And so I think that your channel is in many ways, I don't think your channel would be the way it is if you didn't have the day job you have.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I really appreciate that. I really like that about your story, both the Pentecostal aspect and the day job aspect that you have, because I find as a minister preaching, I have to do a lot of work to just try to push aside this very heavy veneer of projected normality that has colonized the vast majority of Americans' brains, to the degree that when a disaster happens in their family, they run and say, well, this wasn't supposed to happen. And it's like, why do you think that? Mm-hmm. You think that because most of the days of your life, there's been projected at you an image of normality, and the diagnosis of cancer or the betrayal or the bankruptcy or the lost job or any day of the Lord calamity that intrudes in your life, you somehow think this is an aberration. Yeah. But if you work in a jail, you're like, no, we see all kinds in here.
Yeah.
So I think that's really helpful. And what's interesting, I think, about the movie industry and motion picture arts are that in some ways, not always, but in some ways, even though, yes, the people are more beautiful than average, and at least the artists involved in making movies and motion pictures have an intuitive sense of the lie, and so a good number of movies play with that lie.
Yeah.
And unmask the lie. So.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's key to movies, is to put you in somebody else's shoes. I mean, that's really what it's all about, and to show you just to cause you to experience a different way. And I think that my having grown up in a Christian home, you tend to accept the world as it's presented to you, and so the world that I was presented to me was a fairly, this is the box in which things are supposed to be. This is how it's supposed to be. And so I took that out into the world saying, this is the way it's supposed to be. And I found that the pieces didn't always fit in the box that I was given. And I was very much trying to make sense. And one of my things is, people have told me this: you don't compartmentalize very well. No, I don't. I don't compartmentalize very well. I take all of the information that I've been given and I try to have it all fit together. And it bothers me when it doesn't fit together. It really deeply bothers me. Part of my personality is that if the pieces don't go together, then they're not supposed to go together. Maybe they're supposed to be arranged in a different way. And so my beliefs about God and my beliefs about what I knew and how I knew it, and then wrestling with, confronting with the very real aspects of the world and science, and how the world understands the world outside themselves. When I was younger, it was like, scientists, we were told that, all the scientists know that evolution's a lie, and they're just telling us a lie. And then we just can disbelieve it because we really know the truth. And then, I realized, and I still hear that today, that science is just a lie. And I'm like, no, they have reasons for believing it. And you can't just discount it based upon saying that it's a lie, claiming it's a lie. That's right. So that's putting
and
those.
The opposite is told as well. All these Christians, they're just lying about this stuff. It's like, no, they have evidence for believing that.
Yes.
And people generally believe on the basis of evidence. They might not come to the correct conclusion.
Right.
But they'll point to evidence.
Yes.
And that's pretty normal for human beings.
Yeah, and putting those two things together so that that the world could see and that Christians can see, kind of bringing a middle ground. Like I said, I'm a fairly moderate person because I like to moderate everything. How does it all fit together? How does it all work together? And so I think in YouTube and the Logos Made Flesh, my channel, I've tried to do that for people, is to find some common ground by which we can have a dialogue, have a discussion about these ideas, and really wrestle with the hard truths, the facts, the opinions, all of those type of things in a way that is entertaining and people can get something out of, but also to bring some sense of hope rather than hopelessness. Yeah. So I do have a bent, I do have an opinion, I do have a way, a position from which I see the world, but I also want to wrestle with other people's points of view and say, boy, they really have checked my point of view, and I need to wrestle with that as if it's as equal to my own. And that's, a lot of people don't want to give that to somebody. Like your opinion could be as great or better than my own, and that, boy, I just need to know. I need to wrestle with that. So sit down with it.
Well, let's go back to what generated your interest in film.
Well, my dad's a storyteller. I would say that probably, and my dad being fairly liberal rather than my mom. My mom, again, they're both conservative, but my dad's fairly on the liberal side. Yeah. So we were allowed to watch all sorts of films growing up. I mean, it wasn't like rated R films were off limits or, whatever. Yeah. So I was exposed to television, movies, all that stuff. And my dad's a storyteller by nature, so I've heard him tell stories all my life, and I just enjoy it. I enjoy the emotion, the experience. Mm-hmm. There's something about either genetic by nature or by nurture. I just gravitate towards stories. Even in the Bible, I gravitate towards the stories of the Bible more than I gravitate to the letters of the Bible. Some people just like talking about Paul's letters or whatever, and they don't quite focus on the stories. But I've always focused on the stories because I just see how they're true, how they work, how they can change someone's opinion, how they can, and that's why I gravitate towards stories. And I've always wanted to tell my own, find stories that I could tell myself. So
you went to film school in Biola. How did that happen?
Well, about like I said, in high school, I thought about how could I share with people my point of view, my love for the Lord, and I read books. There was a lot of Christian back in the 90s. There was a big Christian industry for novels, new novels coming out. And Frank Peretti, This Present Darkness had really radicalized and changed people. Were producing all, and so I'd read these really crappy books, and I was like, I can do that. Not to say they were crappy. I really thought they were good, and I was like, I can do that. Yeah. So I decided I wanted to write my own story. So I had this idea of writing. I had this we had this pastor who came, this evangelist that came, and he preached about the harrowing of hell, about Christ going down into Hades and rescuing the captives. And I thought, that's a great ending for a book. What were they doing down there? What was going on? I need to write that story. So I worked on that for, a couple of years, thinking about how can I write that story, much in the vein of This Present Darkness, about people trapped down there and Christ coming to set them free. And I couldn't figure it out. Eventually I just left it, but I thought, well, maybe I'll go into film. Maybe I'll just do story. Maybe I'll edit my own stories. So I started reading books on narrative screenwriting, all that stuff. So I thought about being a screenwriter. That's why I went down there. But I edited a little bit in high school and in college. And I ran actually a group called Human Videos, where we did music videos, but to kind of like, we listen to a song and then you would act that out in a dramatic fashion. So that's my bent, is more drama and more, although I'm not that gifted in it, it's just something I gravitate towards. Mm-hmm. I think that's what is that the question? I'm trying to piece together. You got a day job. You're working in a lockup as a day job. Mm-hmm. You've got a wife. You've got a family. So already you've got responsibilities. You've got things on your plate. You've got a heart that wants to share what you've been given, and then you start. Similar to me. I started with a blog. You started with a blog, and what kind of things did you do with your blog? And that all gravitates. So like I said, my idea of not having any compartmentalization, like I'm just interested in everything. I'm just interested in the world. I'm interested in the way things tick. And so it kind of all stems from my love for the Bible, for one thing, the stories of the Bible, and particularly how the Bible works. Multnomah Bible College really opened my eyes to seeing how literature works. And I'm just not talking about the Bible being they didn't want to describe it as literature, but now that I know a little bit more, it is how literature works, how stories work. And I was really taught that in my Bible college experience, education. So I'm taught how stories work. And when I went to Multnomah Bible College, we had a class called Inductive Bible Studies. And in the inductive method, I just thought was overkill. We went through Jonah, 4 chapters, the book of Jonah, for the entire semester. We're talking about like 16 weeks or whatever it is. It was, and I thought, this is so dumb. This is so overkill. Jonah just means what it does. And I just had this flat surfacey understanding that if I read the Bible, I know what the Bible means. Why would I need more than that? You're ripping into a word that goes on and on and on and on, which I had to do. I'm just like, this is boring and absolutely pointless. A year later, I had the same professor. His name was Ray Lubeck. And he said, he never told us what he thought the meaning of Jonah was. And so we did this ripping apart this 4-chapter book for 16 weeks. And at the end, we just had no idea what it meant. So at the end of a second class, which was text and canon, which is the idea of where the text comes from, canon, all those kind of things, he says, there's going to be no final in this class, but if you want to know what I think Jonah means, come to the final. And the whole place was packed. Not one person didn't show up because everybody had inductive Bible study, and they were all intrigued, like, what did we just do? This is a year after the fact. So we don't have a test. It's all finals week. We all show up, and we're like, what does it mean? And he told us, he goes, well, Jonah isn't one book. Jonah is part of the book of the 12 minor prophets, which originally were edited together as one composition in the Hebrew Bible. And if you look at like Malachi, I think it is, you have the destruction of Nineveh and all this kind of stuff. You have this connection with the day of the Lord and how it all works together, and how basically the book of Jonah is about Israel itself and its reluctance to go and be a witness and light to the nations. And they're basically they're cheering on the destruction that God's going to bring about. And God says, hey, I care about these people too. And so it becomes the key book in the New Testament where that this is the heart of God, that he's not just about the Jewish people, but he's about all people.
Yeah.
And boy, boom, my mind just went like, wait, the context matters. Like, it's not just these 4 chapters, but there's a much bigger things, and everything started to click. And at the same time, I'm reading the Gospel of John, relatively thereafter. I'm teaching my students in the youth group. I just didn't know what to teach on. So I grabbed the book and let's just open up the pieces at least. Yeah. Let's read the chapter by chapter through every Sunday morning. Yeah. We went chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Yeah. We got to chapter 3 and I asked him, so what does the water mean? That's where Jesus says you must be born of water and the Spirit. Well, I didn't know what it meant. I had all these 5 different things that Multnomah Bible College had taught me what this could mean. 5 different things, 5 different interpretations. And at the same time, I'm reading 1 John 5:6, which says he didn't come by water only, but by water and blood. And I thought, the same author, 2 different books, but water is a shorthand reference for something. And it clearly means something to him. And I would think, why do that symbolism mesh? Mm-hmm. So here's my inability to compartmentalize. I don't see 1 John and John as distinct. I see them as one work by the same author and using a shorthand reference in the same way, and therefore it probably has the same meaning. So how can I know what that means? Because I know that 1 John 5:6 is interpreted in vastly different ways than John 3:5 is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, how does it mesh? How might it go together? So then I just started, I know context matters now because I just had the thing. I know context matters. So I opened up John, read it all the way from cover to cover, and I realized that I'd read John like 3 or 4 times before this, and I'm like, for the first time, I'm realizing water's everywhere. It's not just in chapter 1. It's not just in chapter 1. It's not in chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it's in 9, 11, 13. And 19. It's in almost in every chapter of the Gospel of John. Yeah. And it's used in this enigmatic, symbolic way. Yeah. And so that got me questioning and thinking about how we can know what someone means, especially the symbolism that they're using, because this is something that I'd never been introduced to or even talked about in even Multnomah Bible College or in my Pentecostal background, which tended not to be. It was very biblical, I would say, but wasn't necessarily this symbolic approach to the Bible.
Right. So, which is interesting because Pentecostalism in terms of the different branches of the church, of course, tends to trade more commonly in dreams and visions, which of course are in almost every case purely symbolic. And then there's an interpretation and, on and on. And so it's very interesting the way the different denominations sort of work around the various aspects of symbolism.
Yes.
Where Pentecostalism can be quite literalistic in its approach to the Bible, but highly symbolic in its life within the church and in the kind of the extra biblical conversations within the church that they're trying to align with the Bible.
Yeah, so, Revelation, the interpretation of Revelation would be central here, is that the idea is that Pentecostals tend to think that they're much more literalistic when it comes to the interpretation of Revelation, and yet they're highly symbolic in the way they go about that. I'm like, they just think they're more literalistic. It's funny to me. So
no, that's very true. So on your blog, I haven't looked up your blog. What kinds of things did you do in your blog, and how did that then sort of become a YouTube channel? One of the interesting things about your YouTube channel is you've been doing it, at least you've been doing it that long. I see
about 4 years.
About 4 years, yeah. The first of your videos I ever watched, which I really loved, was on Shawshank Redemption. I thought that was
right on.
I thought that was so cool. I showed it to my family, and it's interesting that in terms of the movies that you've done some treatment of, you've really got some. These are some of my favorite movies: Shawshank Redemption,
Mhm.
Groundhog Day, No Country for Old Men, Castaway. I mean, a lot of these are really good. But you don't, unlike me, who puts out 4 or 5 or 6, or if you're looking at the 2 channels, 7 or 8 videos a week.
Uh-huh.
You put out videos every now and then. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, I try to do something when I sit down. I'm like going, I'd like to see 1 million people watch this, and if 1 million people are going to watch this, I want to put the thought and the time and the effort into it. I want to make sure that I'm saying something which is accurate, but also something that hasn't been said before. I don't want to simply retread ground that people have been at and stuff that they come to the channel and they say, I've seen that before somewhere else and someone else did it better.
Yeah.
I know that I'm not really that gifted in my speaking or my presentation. I mean, I'm off the cuff. I'm fine. I can communicate just fine. But some people are much better at being very focused, and I don't know, it just seems like they just are prolific in this kind of stuff. But for me, I feel like the emotion is a part of a movie. I want to recreate the experience of the movie. I want people to remember the movie. I want to not just simply cut out all the sound and talk over the images from the movie like some people do.
Yeah.
I want to invite people into what they remember about the movie, and then to show them something that totally turns it on its head. Like, you did not see this before.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And I wanted to do that with the Bible. That's what I do with the Bible. I want to take people into the Bible and show them what they haven't seen before. The problem is that most people haven't read the Bible and don't know it well enough to know if you're telling the truth or not. They just go,
Yeah.
They kind of roll their eyes and they go, well, I don't know if that's radical or not. And they'll just go to their own teacher and they'll think, well, I either disagree with it based upon what their teacher is saying.
Yeah.
But when it comes to movies like The Shawshank Redemption,
Yeah.
everybody's seen that at least once, probably more than once,
Yeah.
and they remember the story. And then when I say, well, this is how it's supposed to be interpreted, their mouths drop open and they go, I never saw that before.
Yeah.
And yet it's there. It's true. I haven't messed with anything. I haven't told you anything different than what you already know. I just put the pieces in a way that you hadn't quite put together yet. So I'd like that experience, but finding that experience, because I don't want to simply just talk about movies in a way that everybody else has done. So having that experience is part of the channel. Logos Made Flesh is to see the thing that you did not see. It's to see the unseen in what you already saw, and moving beyond just the surface appearance.
Okay. No, that's really good. I, as a YouTuber, I'm about opposite you. I put everything out there and it's a mess. And it's like, here I'm throwing, I'm not sure what before I don't sure what. If you can pick out something good in there, God bless you. You found something, but let me know if you find something, because I don't know something's good. But I'm very impressed by your channel, and I'm very impressed by your work. You showed me, I don't see it on your channel yet, but you showed me, what you've been doing with Arrival. And again, I don't know if that's maybe on Patreon only right now.
No,
but
it's coming. It's coming. My composer's still working on it. He's supposed to be done with it like today or tomorrow. So I'm hoping we get it out like by the end of this week.
Well, I think it's amazing. I saw Arrival a few years ago, and what I like about your treatment of these movies, like you say, Shawshank Redemption is a film. I've got three adult children living at home now with me during the pandemic, and so often what we do is we just throw the remote to a kid and say, you pick what to watch. And it's very interesting to see what they come up with. And so my son, picked up Shawshank Redemption, and I watched that through again. And actually, because I had seen your video of it a while ago, I'd been thinking about your video as I was watching it. But your videos really do help just open up. And this is why, when I saw you on Jonathan Peugeot's channel, I thought, oh, that's a very obvious. You and Jonathan are doing very similar things.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I think about this a fair amount when I watch Jonathan's work. There's a funny interplay with symbolism, because symbolism is, in a sense, it's a proto language. It's a proto nearly universal language
Mm-hmm.
that nicely translates between cultures and times.
Mm-hmm.
But like with language is a very funny thing, because on one hand, if you know multiple languages, so I worked in Spanish for a number of years when I was a missionary. uh, by no means consider myself a Spanish expert. My wife's Spanish is far better than my own. But one of the things that if you live and work in another language for a while, you begin to inhabit that language. And inhabiting, and you go into this in your film on Arrival, inhabiting that other language opens you up to thoughts that you can't have, or at least are very difficult to have
Mm-hmm.
in your mother tongue.
Mm-hmm.
And symbolism, sort of like a language, but a very translatable language, permeates out. But both you and Jonathan are working in that liminal space between symbolism and our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very revelatory space to be in. And so your videos, I think, nicely inhabit that space, because as you said, you open up a movie and say, now you saw this whole movie,
Mm-hmm.
but in a sense, to harp on Jesus, but did you have eyes to see?
Yeah.
And so now, by virtue of this other video, I'm going to give you eyes to see
Mm-hmm.
what was before you when you watched the movie, but you didn't grasp it, did
Mm-hmm.
you? That's a
Mm-hmm.
very powerful thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and that aha moment, I think, gets people like, for instance, atheists and Christians alike, but particularly atheists who think that they see the world, that they think that science alone gives them information or value in the world, like they can see everything clearly, and then you give them that experience to say, not everything is just there. The surface level isn't just the only thing that's there. There's things that go beyond that. And talking about language itself, is that symbolism and language. Language is symbolism. That's all it is. A word is a symbol, and it has, it's the signifier and the signified. Those two things go together. So what we do every day in language is we work and manipulate symbols. I mean, that's the only thing we do. I'm thinking about doing a series on how I know, and I think this is probably where Jonathan and I differ. Is Jonathan looks to symbolism as if it's a spiritual thing in the world, and I think it is. I'm not saying it's not spiritual, but I'm probably taking more of a scientific approach to it, saying that you can objectively know some of these things, and that it's not simply, it's not in the ether somewhere. We can find it. It's grounded in what we truly know about our experience. We know we know far more about interpretation than we like to give ourselves credit for, because we're doing it every day. In our conversation right now, we are interpreting each other, and that requires a great deal of skill and experience and knowledge. I like to ask people, for instance, how do you know when someone's being ironic? When someone says the opposite of what they literally mean.
Yeah.
How do you know that? I mean, you're
yeah.
able to, probably with some people are better at it than others. Some people might go over their heads.
Yeah.
But we know a great deal about how to interpret in this non-literal sense, this non-literal meaning that comes through all the time in lots of different instances.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to get too far on that, but I think
that's a really interesting thing. Because individuals on the autism spectrum, for example,
mm-hmm.
they can be highly intelligent people that can do amazing things in certain areas, often technical areas of expertise that have to deal with I have real issues with this word literal, but
right.
But with these certain realms that are very closely, tightly cause and effect linked.
Uh-huh. But
often a person on the autism spectrum, irony, some of these subtleties that you just mentioned, it's sort of like us hearing, very low frequently sound. They just don't hear it. Whereas others in the room will watch and know what's going on. And that's a very interesting thing about us.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess when we think about words, and this is in terms of symbolism, when we see words, I guess I got two thoughts I want to go back to. I want to go back to Jonathan's thought, but about symbolism and how it's a universal language. Let me just go there real quick.
Yeah.
Symbolism and how it's a universal language. Why certain things are symbolic across cultures, like for instance, a new birth. A new birth is symbolic across cultures because people know, everybody knows what birth is. It's not like it's unique to America. It's not unique to Russia. It's unique. It's something, a part of the human experience about birth and what it means to be born. We know what a baby looks like when it comes out. We know the umbilical cord. We have all of those things which are common knowledge, and we know what it means to be born, what it was like to not be born and then to be born. So that's not something that's unique to Jesus when he says you must be born again. That idea of being reborn is universally symbolic. It doesn't matter. Now, when he says I'm the bread of life, bread is specific to a culture, because if you go to Asia, it's rice. It's not wheat. It's wheat elsewhere, or barley or whatever, but it's rice elsewhere. So there are things that are, there's imagery and experiences which are universal to everyone. And by connecting in with those universal ideas, we can share that experience with others. When we show those images become symbolic of something. Whereas if we get very particular, like for instance in Castaway, when we start talking about a box that may be looking like a missile, that becomes very particular to a cultural situation that existed between Russia and the United States in the 80s and 90s, and you start recognizing what a missile is and that subtext there. So there are some things which are far broader in their symbolic approach because they're universal to human experience, whereas other things, because of our particular experience, become more focused. And that's where I think that I think we're really objectively knowing why some things are symbolic and why some things aren't, and why they objectively are symbolic that way. New birth is objectively understandable because we understand what it is universally. The same thing with certain other instances, but if you've got to know the context in which, for instance, Castaway was produced, it's produced for Americans, it's produced for the Western world, it's not necessarily produced for the entire world. It's a specific context with people nowadays. And that symbolism can begin to lose its power as we get further and further away from the context in which it was first delivered. People might not understand or know. They have to get back to the history and read again. Anyway, so that's the idea of why some things are universal and non-universal. And why it's not necessarily just a spiritual practice, but more of an objective practice that we do every day. Does that make sense? I think I got sidetracked on that.
That makes sense. But there were two things. There was that, and then there was something else you were going to talk about.
The other thing was, why do words? So we look at words, and people who are look specifically at a word, and they see, like for instance, if I say the word dog, you don't think about the sound or the combination of letters. You think about the thought of a dog, because you're so keyed into the symbol that you fail to recognize the distinction between the sound or the letters and the meaning that it signifies. You instantly go to the meaning it signifies because you're so aware of that sound and that word. Now, if you pull those things apart, like for instance, Spanish, you say the word pero. If I say the word pero, if you don't know that word very well, like some people in the audience might not know, you instantly hear the sound and you instantly hear the letters. You're more tied into the physicality of that thing rather than the thought or meaning behind it. Even if you're told pero means dog, you still have to translate dog or pero into dog before you can understand what it means. But you probably know this, that eventually you'll start to dream in that language. That's right. That you'll start to connect those things so closely together, so intimately together, that the sound and the combination of levers becomes that thought itself, almost to basically to the point where they're without distinction. But if we realize that words are not, like for instance, why does dog mean what it does? There's nothing inherent in the word dog which makes it mean what it does to us. It's only by our experience. It's only because we've agreed to it. It doesn't mean dog for any other reason than that, because it could be pero, it could be something else. But that's the idea, is that it doesn't have to connect. And when you see that words as symbols, dog, for instance, so intimately connected with what we think we know about it, and we realized that a different meaning could be attached to the sound or the combination of letters. And when you realize that in English and in language, that there is nothing inherently meaningful about the words that we say, but they're all more or less a rainbow, a kaleidoscope of differing, varying meanings, and that we're choosing and selecting which meaning to attach to it by their use in context. So when we say dog, I mean, you think when you know what it means, but in a coded conversation, let's say we want to do a code, all of a sudden I tell you, well, dog actually means key.
Yeah.
Now you have to translate that out, because now we know in the context that dog no longer means what we think it does. It means something else. Yeah. And when you start to see how words play like that, I think we instinctively know this. Yeah. Yeah. Some people are better at it than others, recognizing that there's a great, I mean, sexual innuendo is a common one. I mean, we talk about things in a certain way in that jokey sense. But when we start to play with the things we think are very concrete, like we look at words and we think they're very concrete, they mean it because the dictionary told me so. No, they don't. There's no meaning attached to any word other than the meaning that you give to it. And the meaning which you give to it is the one you think your audience will understand. So you have to either allow them to understand it by telling it, defining it for them, or moving between those two things. So anyway.
Well, but that's really important with respect to movies, because good movie makers do that with the elements of their film.
Yes.
Because, you know, a film is a little universe that's sort of, you know, here, I'm going to make a universe. And so the different elements, I was watching, you know, one of my favorite shows on television right now, Better Call Saul. I was watching an episode where, you know, Jimmy puts a beer bottle on a railing. This is at the beginning of the episode. And Kim takes it off because, you know, a beer bottle on a railing that could fall and break in the parking lot and people could be hurt and glass and all that.
Yeah.
By the end of the episode, Kim comes in and she's throwing beer bottles into the parking lot, you know, and so a beer bottle on a railing is, you know, they've created a world, but
where that's meaningful, right?
It's meaningful. But now, of course, for a North American audience, one of the things that you learn in North America, as opposed to, let's say, living in a place like the Dominican Republic, a lot of these, I mean, we live in a very rich world where things have meaning in one place that they don't have the same meaning or no meaning or little meaning in another place. And so, but movies are these wonderful things where they take, you know, they can create a world in a sense. And obviously the mastery of the artistry is creating that world.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that, so when most people, and it's funny because the conversations that I have online, they have opened up my eyes to how people see things and why they see things a certain way. But I mean, just instinctually, when the kid sits down and watches a movie, and when you're a little bit older and older, if you don't grow in your sense of what things could be, you just take things like, if I watch a story about Shawshank, it's about a couple guys in prison, and it could be emotional because it's about these guys, and it's not about me. It's about those guys out there, and they're doing their thing, and it's interesting, it's fun, it's entertaining, whatever. But there's nothing beyond that surface level. And if we realize that in language, the words we speak, the conversations, context, how we interpret that thing is no different, really no different than watching a movie on the screen. If we see the correspondence and the correlation between those two ideas, we can begin to see that movies themselves bleed over into different ways. And the way we interpret those things are exactly the same, even if they're different in the way they're expressed or visualized or whatever. Let's see here. Yeah, it's just really fascinating to me that people can't, that when you, let me go back. Ex Machina. You know the movie Ex Machina? Yeah. I did a video on my channel called The Death of God. And that movie, in that movie, Nathan, the billionaire tech boss who creates Ava the android, he created the world's most popular search engine. And he names that world's most popular search engine Blue Book. And Blue Book sounds like Facebook. It sounds like, it's probably a Google-esque type thing. But the word Blue Book, his meaning behind that word, why Alex Garland, the screenwriter, selected the term Blue Book, is significant because it's the lecture notes for Ludwig Wittgenstein's the philosophical investigations. And in that, Ludwig Wittgenstein argued that he wanted to kind of break philosophy apart from, you know, why it works and why it doesn't work. And basically he argued what language was. And he said language or meaning, let's just say meaning is use. Meaning is use. And that's really significant because when we look at Ava and the question of the movie, whether or not she's conscious or not conscious, whether we can, whether she's, you know, having experience just like our own, that question isn't significant. In fact, the film throws out the question whether she has consciousness or not, because we don't know if anyone has consciousness really, because I can see inside my own head the experience, this internal world. I can see the world subjectively, but there is no objective world. Let's just say that for anyone, there is no objective world. We're all seeing the world subjectively. We're all seeing it through the grid of our internal conscious experience. And I don't know if you're experiencing the world in the same way I am. I don't even know if you're conscious. All I know is that I can see your behavior, your actions, your whatever you're doing. And what I infer from my own conscious experience is that what you're doing is comparable to what I see in me. Mm-hmm. And so therefore I infer consciousness based upon use, based upon presentation, based upon how it physically presents to me. You physically present to me. I infer you're conscious. And that is like no different than the meaning of words. When I look to a word, do I know the speaker's intent? No, because I can't get inside the speaker's head. There is no way for me to get back to what the speaker, even if he told me, I mean, it'd be closer perhaps, but the thing is I can't get back into the speaker's head. All I can do is look at the surface level and infer that meaning, that intended meaning, that consciousness, that whatever, that intangible spiritual aspect that we go, what is it? Where does it come from? All I can do is infer that from what I see in me. So in some sense, it is circular. In some sense, my understanding about your consciousness or the meaning of your words that you're using is circular as I'm going back and forth, you know, looking at how I would understand it, why I understand it the certain way, but also trying to recognize your meaning. Anyway, I think that's a really foundational, important aspect of looking at the world and recognizing why things are the way that they are and how we can see a deeper meaning in them. So I'm trying to get to this more objective approach to say, no, you can know that things do have a symbolic meaning, even if they don't immediately present themselves to you. So some people think that art is just whatever you make of it. It's just your own interpretation, right? You just make stuff up. Anybody can interpret anything. And I'm like, no, that's not the way it works. You can't just go to a movie. Now you could do that. That's fine. But if your goal is to understand what somebody else means, then to recognize that is a circular process of thinking and rethinking and going over what they've actually said to recognize the larger context in which they've said it.
Yeah.
So
how do you choose the movies you're going to treat on your channel?
That comes with finding the idea that says to me that this is a good enough idea, which hasn't been covered enough. And I try to also find movies that everybody's seen and seen more than once. I don't, like I did A Quiet Place recently. Hasn't had the traction of the other videos. I think it was a great film, but I think a lot of people just didn't see it. They had no curiosity about it either. Another idea is I find that the movies that do the best are movies that people walk away from thinking, what did I just watch? I like No Country for Old Men. They walked away and they're like, I had no idea what that was about. And when you have, and like Castaway, I love Castaway. People didn't walk away from that movie with a question about it. They walked away and they thought, I saw what I needed to see, and it was a survival film, and they have no desire to go back or not desire, but there's nothing that says I got to do a search and find out what Castaway meant, because they think they know what it meant, rather than saying, no, there's something more here. But those films where you think you know that you know there's a question and you don't know what the answer is, that's the kind of film I'm looking for. Popular films that lead to that kind of question. I don't know if Arrival will do quite so well because it wasn't quite as popular. And Interstellar, that's the one I'm looking at doing next, was popular. I think that's hands down. People have said, what did I just watch? I have no idea what I just watched. I've watched a great movie, but there's something there that's deeper than just guys in space, people in space. So, and there is. So.
Well, that's really interesting. And one of the things I think about a lot is how we have this sense often of, well, there's something there and I don't know it, but part of me knows it. But there's the conscious self that's that imagines it's somehow running the show
Mm-hmm.
when it really isn't. But then there's the rest of us who know things that the conscious self doesn't know. And this, of course, is where dreams come from, and dream interpretations and paying attention to our dreams. I mean, Jung and Freud both paid a lot of
Mm-hmm.
attention to their dreams because they figured there's stuff in there that I want to know, but I don't have access to it, so I'm going to watch the dreams. Now, what movies over the last couple of years have you seen that? I mean, is it the case that? Well, let me ask you this question: How do you choose what movies you watch, and how do you watch them?
Oh, I watch everything. I mean, how do I choose? Just something that looks interesting, remotely interesting. I don't say I would watch everything. I just watched Parasite the other night. Watch, popular films, stuff that's out there. I watched Lighthouse. I think when it came out, I thought that looked really interesting. I haven't seen
Lighthouse.
it. Black and white, done kind of in a 1920s, 1930s style. It's kind of a horror film, but I wouldn't say it's horror. It's very atmospheric. It's really good,
Okay.
but interesting. Just one of those ones you scratch your head when you walk away from it. But how do I choose? I think what happens is that, like, for instance, Mad Max. When I watched Mad Max, I wanted to see that because it just looked awesome. It looked fun, entertaining. And I went more or less walking into a movie which I felt like I just wanted to be entertained. And I don't have any preconceived ideas that movies have to be meaningful. They don't. A lot of films are
Some of them are.
yeah. Like, I would say that, oftentimes I just look at Transformers and I'm going, that's just guys, with guns and explosions, and there you go. It needs to be no more difficult than that. And Indiana Jones. I love Indiana Jones. Is there any complexity to Indiana Jones? Well, there's some things you probably could go into about how it was filmed. Steven Spielberg being Jewish and his his basically wanting to get even with the Nazis. That kind of stuff. But I mean, is it deeply symbolic? No, I don't think it's deep. I think it's fairly on the surface, level stuff. There's nothing that's going to surprise you about, you're not going to walk away from Indiana Jones being very surprised by anything. It is what it is. So when I walk into Mad Max, I just had that impression that it's going to be just entertainment. But I think I enjoyed that movie so much that I probably watched it like 6 or 7 times. I brought it home to my family. We watched it as a family. My daughter was 7 years old at the time, and she loved it. She got a kick out of it. I kept saying, I don't know why this movie's rated R, my own personal point of view.
Yeah.
But we watched it. And I think it was probably the 5th or 6th time just watching it, just having a fun time with it, that those threads that start saying, there's more here than meets the eye. And that usually comes with seeing the whole, like you'll get into Arrival.
Right.
It comes with memorizing the pathway through a movie. Because when you watch it the first time, you have no sense of the pathway, how the movie gets from point A to point B. You just follow the course and you're just going along and all the jumps in. But when you watch a movie multiple times, keep on going over and over and over it, you start to realize the comparison and contrast being made, the innuendo where a phrase or word shows up here and it shows up there, and the context in which those things are made. And when you can start piecing those puzzles, that you see all the puzzles and all the pieces and how they fit together, you start to realize that there's more meaning here than originally you saw. For instance, I saw that the first thing I saw was that Nux's chain of blood, which was attached from Max to Nux on the car, the front of the car, had a similarity to the umbilical cord that connected Splendid with her baby. And when Splendid dies, that baby is cut from her womb and you only see the foot. And then they cut out the umbilical cord, the only thing they actually show you, and the guy spins it in front of the camera. And you realize, well, how often do you see that in a film where they just want to show you the umbilical cord? Yeah. And you're like, well, what is an umbilical cord? In its substance, it's a chain of blood. And you realize, well, okay, then you have Max being tied to Nux, and then you have when Max first meets Splendid, and he comes across these group of women who are, drinking or washing themselves. He comes up and he needs water. Well, he's carrying Nux on his shoulder, and a very pregnant Splendid walks towards him as he kind of stands there with his, shotgun and tells him to give him water. Well, these contrasting images are supposed to say what's happening to Max is what Splendid's doing. So they're telling you what it's supposed to be in relationship to one another. And that's where you start going. And that's the only thing I saw. Had no intention. I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. It's kind of transgenderism. I thought maybe they're trying to do something uniquely with the culture.
Yeah.
And then when I started pulling on more threads, it just all came. I was just like, boy, this is probably one of the most Christian movies too. It's pretty phenomenal how much George Miller has invested. George Miller is from Greek. He's a Greek immigrant to Australia. His parents were Greek. So interesting enough, he's Greek, probably Greek Orthodox, I imagine, and so definitely has a Christian upbringing of some sort, historically, not necessarily his own personal point of view. But you can see the clash of cultures, the clash of worldviews on display in Mad Max, as you have the war boys who are blowing themselves up, screaming a slogan, "Witness me," and blowing themselves up. And then you have a diametrically opposed religious worldview. These are two religious worldviews that are going on here, clash of cultures, which I'm not just saying that the war boys represent Islam, but they do, but they also represent any type of militant aspect, including the United States, where you have this diametrically opposed point of view, this worldview, which is Christ and the martyrs and the ones who lay down their lives for others. So those are the two things on display. So it's very, very interesting. So that's how going long story short, that's how I select a movie. I watch a movie because I enjoy it. I watch a movie because I'm gravitated towards it. And if it's popular and I find something interesting to it, I'll do a video on it.
Okay.
So
what's your take on, in biblical studies, it's authorial intent. I suppose in movies it's directorial intent. I mean, because we're not our own masters, and we're not fully masters of even the things that we produce.
Right.
Meaning that which we produce can say more than we know, but it depends which we were talking about with we. Mm-hmm. So how do you think about that with respect to the filmmakers and what you find? I
think that's probably the greatest objection that I get about what I do, is to say that a screenwriter who writes a script does not have power over the finished product. So if he has an intent in the script and it's not translated to the film, or the film is mistranslated or mixes it up, that basically, because you have so many cooks in the kitchen making a soup, that you really can't know what one cook had intentions of versus the other cook. They just kind of all work together and it blends together and it is what it is. So that, I agree. I think that can be a real problem. I think what we're looking at, I think probably one of the things I gravitate to is to the films that are more done by auteurs. I think that's the word. Auteurs, somebody who has more power, access, or at least some kind of domineering role in a way a film is produced, like Christopher Nolan or M. Night Shyamalan or Steven Spielberg or whatever. You know that these guys, the studio will give them almost carte blanche reign, and that they're deeply tied not just with the directing or producing of the film, they're also deeply tied with the script. So in every part of the process, their hands are somewhere in the pie, making sure that the decisions that are made or the ultimate goal is realized. So that's another thing. So it's not just, and I think that also I want to say that those type of movies, I think movies in general, I don't think, well, let me go back here. Filmmakers think about their movies far more than we do. And that's just a given. People say most people think that they think about them as much as we do. Like we watch a movie and we're like, wow, what I got out of that movie is exactly what they thought I should get out of that movie. And I'm like going, they spent thousands of hours and millions of dollars to make something and make something great, and you think that they thought about it as much as you did. I mean, I just think that's phenomenal. I think that when someone has, like, when I start to look at something, I realized that the first view and the second view and the third view, I may not even pick it up. I've been watching, I think I watched Interstellar probably, I would say 5 times in the last couple of weeks. I just keep watching bits and pieces of it going through. And I watched the first time and I thought, okay, the second time, third, I probably watched it 10 times in all over the course of the years, and did not see the stuff that I eventually do come to realize, that Christopher Nolan had far more meaning to it than I even could imagine. And I think that most people even pick up on, because it's such a, so many different pieces going on in that film. So, yeah, I think, so Authorial Intent, I think, is significant. I'm not doing films that I don't think are tied directly to the idea of the script, that the script had an intent, and I'm delving into what the scriptwriter had in mind, and that the finished product realizes. Now, I think that there can be accidents, that something's realized in the process, like when you're doing a film and an actor decides, I'm going to do this and I'm going to make this person such and such a way. Well, but I usually think that's under the advice and direction of what they already know to be true about the story itself, that the scriptwriter or director is saying they're interpreting the film, they know what they want to come across, and therefore they add it. Coen Brothers, a good example, Coen Brothers is No Country for Old Men. In the book, because it's a adaptation from a Cormac McCarthy book, No Country for Old Men. I've read the book, I've seen the movie, and most people want to say, well, you didn't give Cormac McCarthy any credit for the movie. And I'm like going, I'm not dealing with Cormac McCarthy. I'm talking about a Coen Brothers film. They chose the film because they're the Coen Brothers. They liked it, and they translated it in the way that they thought it should be translated, because people don't realize, even if it's faithful to the movie, the book itself, there's a lot of things that the Coen Brothers add to the movies in the visuals that they present. But one of the things they changed, one of the ways they did change the script from Cormac McCarthy's book, is they add that part where Ed Tom's cousin, the one who's paralyzed, he says, you can't act like everything's waiting on you. Basically, he's saying that death is inevitable, blah, blah, blah. And he says, because that's vanity. And that word vanity is not in the book. And I'm like, so it's not just willy-nilly that the Coen Brothers put it in there. They put it in there because your head starts going, where have I heard vanity before? And it's not just the song, You're So Vain. It's a biblical reference. That's right. Vanity, vanity, says the preacher. All is vanity. Even though we translate as meaningless. It's the KJV version. KJV version. So
well, and it's fun when they're taking, I mean, and we all do this. I've sort of built my channel commenting on the comments of others, but that is basically how culture grows and transforms. It's, here's a McCormick book, and then a Coen, and then your video on top of it, and that's basically how cultures grow.
And that's why words change their meaning.
Where do you want to see your Where do you want to see your channel? Are you all set, Mark? Did you get those checks?
I do, and I'll get back to you as soon as I get them signed.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. Where do you? What do you want from your channel? If you're 90 years old, and your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren are all around you, and someone says, Papa, tell me about that YouTube thing you did. What at that point do you want to look back and say, this is what it was for, and this is why it mattered? What do you want from it?
That's a great question, because I think that in many ways I have got out at what I wanted it to be initially. Like just that first video of the Shawshank Redemption, and basically the first 4 videos that I did. The first 4 videos I did came out in they're basically 4 months. I did one video, then I did the Groundhog's Day, No Country for Old Men, and Mad Max. And I'd done all those, and they just, boom, they just went off. But those 2, I think probably No Country for Old Men and Shawshank Redemption were probably the 2 ones that I love the most, because they express something about the hope and the hopelessness in our world. And that you can have hope in the midst of hopelessness, and that why not choose hope rather than hopelessness? Even if you think that there's no reason to hope, still choose hope. because hope is the means by which we continue and we exist, and life can be good. So I think that those, just to have a conversation with people and how much people have come and gravitated those ideas, I'm very grateful. I'm grateful to God because he put me on the earth for something, and I was always wondering what that thing is. And if it's just those two films, I'm very happy. So where do I want to go from now? That's the thing, is every time I'm thinking, where do I take it now? What do I tell people? Because you can't keep finding, these revolutionary things in movies that people have seen, and yet I want to find that thing, and I don't have a backlog of or a giant backlog of things that people haven't seen, and would go, boy, that's really exciting. I don't want to just keep doing the same thing over and over again. I don't want to just keep boring people like an M. Night. M. Night was great. He did The Sixth Sense, and then he did it again, and he did it again, and he did it again, and people are going, yeah, we've seen that before, and we all know what you're going to do. Yeah. So, like, for instance, doing the Jesus thing, people got to the impression that I just saw Jesus in every film, like Mad Max, and I saw him in Shawshank Redemption, and of course you're just going to do Jesus in every film. And then I did the Death of God in Ex Machina, and people were like, are you a Christian? And I'm like, I want you to know that I don't just see things because I want to see them there. I'm also wrestling with the things that I don't want to see. The things that are there and we're exposed to, and that this truly is, I believe, Ex Machina is a fantastic film, but I truly believe it's an anti-Christian film.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I've pestered you probably long enough. Anything you want to pester me about, or note, or take this conversation someplace that I haven't anticipated?
Well, who's the most interesting person that you've talked to? What do you think of all your podcasts? What do you?
Ooh, that's risky because there's a lot of people out there. Surely it's me, and other people think, no, it's not me. I probably suffer from a certain conversational amnesia, in that so often my favorite conversation is the one that I just had.
Mm-hmm.
I find human beings to be, absolutely amazing. And that word is threadbare right now. It's just been way overused in the last 10, 15 years. But the range of human beings, again, just now coming in, there's a guy there's a restraining order. He's not allowed to be around here because this is a whole long story that some people know. But he was here, and we're on good terms. I mean, he attacked a member of the church and went to jail for 2 years, and it wasn't worth the county to prosecute him, so they just let him out and slapped him with a restraining order. But and his story, if I were a movie maker or a better author, or if that were my gift area of giftedness, just this one homeless person's story alone is just, he grew up in a Mormon household, was big into athletics, skiing, gymnastics. I don't know, but probably fairly early on wrestled with mood. He's
mood disorder.
Bipolar. So, and I'm sure in jail you see folks, the mental illness rates in jail are, so but on one hand, deeply steeped in the Mormon faith, as Mormon as you can be, but at the same time can't give up drugs and alcohol. And so I just look at this one life, and it's tragic, and it's glorious, and it's all right there. And because he's homeless, because he's a drug user, because he's bigger than life. One of the things that he loves is drumming. And so one of the things that he spends money on is drumsticks. Mm-hmm. And one day I was driving in a road near here, and there was a interstate overpass. He was just drumming the heck out of that, the rail there on the overpass. And I wanted to stop and take some video of him. But that one little life,
mm-hmm.
and there are billions of them, and not all of them quite as interesting. But what I've seen is that almost everyone is, if you can start to, scrape off some of the veneers that they've put on to hide themselves in this world.
Yeah.
and so, I started, well, actually, I started my YouTube channel first just a way to give people a chance to see sermons that they missed. And then Freddie, who's in my church, if you haven't seen the Freddie and Paul show on my channel, they're my shortest videos. And, Freddie lives on disability. And he comes to me one day and says, "Pastor, you and I should do a TV show." I'm thinking, he had been on public access TV with his raps because he likes to rap. He's a white guy. And I thought, number one, no, ABC is not going to pick us up. Number two, no, I am not going to go down to public access and do a TV show with you. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll just take my phone and we'll make little video segments and I'll post them on YouTube and I'll send you the link and your mom the link and I'll put them on Facebook, and 10 or 15 people who know you and are interested might watch one or two of them. So I started that. And then I was watching Jordan Peterson thinking, oh, I want to process this. But I had for years had a blog where I would just write ideas and process things. And there were other listservs that I would process things. And I couldn't really get any traction in my communities of conversation with Jordan Peterson because they weren't interested in him, which is totally fine. We all live tiny little lives. We can't be interested in everything. And I thought, there's something about YouTube and Jordan Peterson. So I thought, I'd been playing with YouTube a little bit. I thought, I'll make a video about Jordan Peterson because why not?
Yeah.
And so I did, and not a lot happened. But then I made a second one, and that one sort of took off. And then it was like, oh, crap, what have I started? And my real crisis was, what am I going to do with a Freddie and Paul show? Because Freddie had been on a shock jock radio program in Sacramento, and he basically was one of these guys on the radio to be mocked by the shock jock. And so, and I didn't want to set that up.
Yeah.
And I didn't want people basically being ugly to Freddie. But I thought, maybe I'll leave it up and see what happens. And the community, for the most part, around my YouTube channel has been an absolute delight. And I kept making commentary videos on Jordan Peterson and some commentaries on whatever I wanted to, and started putting rough drafts of my sermon on the channel. And then more and more people would want to talk to me and have a conversation. And so I'm a pastor, and so I have conversations with people like you and I are having now. And I'm very curious about their lives because I want to kind of move the stuff away and see the glory that's underneath, because in almost every case I will find it without too much work.
Right.
And so then I had conversations with people, and it was like, first of all, there's a certain repetition in the conversation around Jordan Peterson, so other people might want to notice that. And I had started meetups, and I noticed that there was kind of a pent-up demand for conversation, people finding conversations about Jordan Peterson, because people would come to the meetup and say things like, I tried talking to my wife about Jordan Peterson, but she didn't have anything to do with it, so I got to talk to someone. So then I started, then people would, after I'd have a conversation with people would email me back and they'd say, well, you said something and I can't remember what. Do you remember what you said? I'm like, I don't remember what I said. So I started, Zoom has a recording function, so I started recording the conversations. And then I thought, I bet you, could it be that maybe someone else, one or two other people would be interested in this conversation? So why don't I just post it on my channel? I'll get permission. And, if they're cool and I'm cool, I'll post it. So I posted it. And then that started, then people started really getting into the conversations. And there were too many people that I couldn't have conversations with everyone. So I said, if we've had 2 conversations, you're cut off for now. So then they started talking to each other, and more channels started forming.
Right on.
And so, it's been magical. And
that's awesome.
And I still make videos, and I'm unlike, like I said, my video making is about opposite of yours, because there's almost no video too crappy I won't put up and just think, I'll put this up and I'll see what happens. And if it's crap, it's crap. And if the YouTube comments, but people are very forgiving, and so I've basically used my YouTube channel very selfishly as a place to post my very rough drafty thoughts. But what's been wonderful about it is that other people share their rough drafty thoughts, and I learn from them.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And I guess they watch because they feel they're learning something from me. And so the whole channel has sort of been a conversation. And how cool is that? So,
yeah. So you've almost enjoyed everyone, or at least you're going to go on record to say you've almost enjoyed everyone.
yeah, and this is something that I learned as a pastor, because so you'd have a Bible study, and there's always somebody who's going to come on there in the Bible study and give the right answer. And it's like, okay, congratulations, you've learned the right answer. And as a pastor, I know that that's actually quite more exceptional than you would imagine, but congratulations, you've learned the right answer. But I never found the right answer quite as interesting as the honest answer about, okay, so that this is what a certain group of people have thought is the meaning of this verse. But I want to know what you heard from this verse and how that bounces off your life, because that gives me a window into who you really are. And it might be heretical, it might be, but if you're at least sharing it with me in good faith, that you're not playing a game with me, and this is honestly what you're feeling and thinking about this.
Yeah.
I don't believe that God is offended by this. And the reason for that is I've read the Psalms. And in the Psalms, the psalmists are unvarnished, and so are the prophets. And so this idea that I hear out there from people that the Bible is this, we're almost in a better position now that the Bible is now politically incorrect than we were 50 years ago when the Bible was politically correct. And because at least now
you can be politically incorrect talking about the Bible.
That's right. And so Jordan Peterson comes along, and I was just completely blown away that here this Canadian psychologist who doesn't go to church and doesn't profess allegiance to any Christian denomination, and won't even straightforwardly say that he is a Christian, is he's ambiguous on those points. He starts giving lectures about the Bible in a rented hall in Toronto for 2+ hours of rambling, and people can't get enough of it. And it's like, that's I can't not pay attention to that. That's a burning bush. And I got to go over there and I got to watch this and I got to figure this out. And, a lot of people will say, well, pastor, you're a pastor and you're a confessional pastor, which means you've signed certain doctrinal statements. And so, people can call you up on church charges. All of that is true. But, something is happening here that when I watch it and think about it and reflect on it, I say the Word of God is alive and well in the world, and no amount of cynicism or attempts to destroy it reputationally are going to keep it down. Because here's this Canadian psychologist talking about the Bible, and here are thousands of men and women who, by watching his ramblings about the Bible, are less depressed and more motivated to actually make improvements in their lives. And I think, if you're talking about movements of God, I think this is one. And I don't care if he's a heretic. Because we're all heretics. I'm a Calvinist. That's part of our doctrinal statement. We're all heretics. We're all sinners. We're all heretics. We're all racist. We're all bigots. We're all a mess, okay? That's how all of us are. And so now, I spend a certain number of hours a week making YouTube videos and talking to people on Zoom like we're doing now. So I don't know. I just think God is good, and
Yes.
he's
Yes.
wild and free. And
Yeah.
so he makes things happen that none of us could ever have imagined.
Yeah. How you doing? How you doing with your church? I know you got a small church, and it's kind of been in decline for a number of years because of the location you're at, and it's an aging population, aging church. What's going on there? I don't mean to bring that up. I'm just like, it's something on your mind. It's something on your heart. You did share
It's
that.
always on my mind. I've been, I've been here 22 years, and one of my friends and colleagues over there, he says, yeah, he rolls his eyes every time I talk about my church dying. He's like, you've been saying this for 22 years and it's not dead yet. Like, yeah, but it's going to die one of these days. And I'm sure I'll be here to see it. And I'm sure I'll be partially responsible for its death. But no, it's, so I came here, and the church, with our classes, they were doing a big Willow Creek thing. And so this was all the ideas about how to save declining churches, and that didn't work. It didn't work with our church. It was not about that. But what I came to embrace was the idea that this is the bride of Christ, not my bride.
Mm-hmm.
And so God is going to do with this church what it wills.
Mm-hmm.
What God wills to happen in this church. And so
there's your Calvinist right there coming up.
Yeah.
That's good, man.
So
we need peace, man. We need to go to that, lean on that.
Well, and the church, I mean, part of the reason that the church is, as I often say, so dramatically unsuccessful in terms of the most common metrics of success is that it's just so doggone weird. Because, I mean, it's almost like, I'd laugh with some people, because if someone made a reality show of this church, nobody would ever believe it. It'd be like, be like Tiger King on Netflix. Because you've got the schizophrenic, sleeping, standing up in the back row. You've got the bipolar Mormon who, first day he gets out of jail, he knows there's a restraining order, and he marches into church in the middle of the service. And I have to stop and say, first I didn't see him. And then one of my elders was like,
oh, wow.
Daniel, what are you doing here? There's a restraining order. You can't be here. So he gets up and walks out.
Oh.
And so the church is, on one hand, it's odd and quirky and unusual. And on the other hand, it's beautiful and blessed and beloved, and what God does. And then in the middle of this, I have this YouTube eruption, and then people start, wandering in because it's what's going on here.
Yeah.
And so then we have these meetups that nobody can meet up now, but once the restraining orders are up and that the stay-at-home places are done, then whatever. But so then we have these meetups where we've got mostly atheists and unchurched people who come in and want to talk about philosophy and all kind, whatever we talk about in our meetups, we talk about. And I just think, again, this is God's church. He's going to do what he wants with it.
That's right.
And you go with him. You go with him wherever he takes us. And so that's whatever this is right now, that's here. And so now we're in a pandemic, and of course, other churches are doing Zoom, but it's like, my people can't manage Zoom. Those that have smartphones don't have any apps on them and don't even know how to text. So, Zoom ain't gonna work. So I make little videos, and some can see on YouTube, and some at Facebook, and some I'm sure are watching Charles Stanley. So, I've given up trying to imagine what God is going to do. And so we pray that he gives us this day our daily bread. And so far he has.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else? I don't know what else to say. I've tried managing it and scheming and planning and, making things happen. And I'm just a dramatic failure at all that. So I do what I do.
I'm going to totally overturn our theology here, but Matthew chapter 25, Jesus tells the parable of the sheep and the goats. And we typically have an explanation for that. Jesus says that on the left and on the right, he separates the sheep from the goats. And on the left, he looks at the sheep and says, come you, inherit the kingdom which was prepared for you from the foundation of the world, because I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and in prison. You came to visit me, so on and so forth. And he says, and they say, when, Lord? When did we see you? And he says, to the least I've done these to my brother, you've done it to me. And then he turns to the goat and he says the exact opposite. You can't, you're cast out because you didn't do it to the least of my brothers. You didn't do it for me. Well, we have such a tidy explanation of that parable. I was reading it one day and I recognized that, there's two parables that precede it. And it talks about basically he brings, I can't remember who he brings it before him, but in that parable, he brings the nations. He brings the nations before him. And he says, it's like, these are the leftovers. It's not like this is the Christians and non-Christians. These are everyone who's not part of this group. In fact, the brothers, Jesus says in Matthew, the brothers are those who follow Jesus and do the will of God and keep it. So the brothers are the church. Brothers are the Christians. And here he brings everyone else who's not a believer. And he says, and this is how I interpret it, and I think it's based in Matthew, and he says, if you did it to one of these, my brothers, you did it for me. Because I saw in that, and you think about the world in which Matthew wrote his gospel and took Jesus' parable and applied it to the sits and Laban, as biblical scholars like to say, the life situation, the life setting, is you wonder, in a world where you're the minority, the complete minority, and you look at the vast world out there and you say, well, is God going to save everyone? I mean, who's he going to save? If my family's going to be, not going to be saved or whatever, should I accept Christ? Is he going to be good to those people that have been good to me, that I know and love and cherish and want to see saved? And if they don't accept, if they don't receive, will the kingdom still be offered for them? And I think the radical idea, and this is something we've completely got away from because we lived in a world that was completely Christian. We lived in a world which was by and large 100%, 99%, 98% Christian. And we thought everybody's just got to say the sinner's prayer. There's no excuse. You should just say the sinner's prayer. But in a world where we have like Jordan Peterson's and we have atheists and we have everybody showing up, I think we should remember, the original meaning of Matthew 25, where God says, if you did it for the least of these, my brothers, you did it for me. And I think that a God that holds will not forget the good that is done, even if it was done unknowing. And I think the answer is that they did not know. When they say, when they show up and they're like, I don't even know who you are. They're totally dumbstruck by this Lord that's now over them. I don't even know who you are. And he says, you know that you knew me all along, and it was in these people. And when you love God's people, God will not forget that. He will love you. And basically, I think it's the promise extended to Abraham. In you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. Basically, if you bless the people of God, God will not forget you, and he will bless you the same. Anyway, so I think that in that kind of world, we need to start thinking about the world basically as in the Roman world. We're living in a pagan world, a by and large pagan world. And the idea that we're now the transcendent majority, even though we are still somewhat in the majority, there is a very strong opposition or counter, belief system. And to recognize where we exist and who we are, and not just to depend, I think, and also in terms of evangelism, we so much depend on the classic believe you're guilty in order to be saved. So we have to preach guilt. We have to preach condemnation. We have to preach these things in order for you to turn around. And the funny thing is that doesn't work in a world that doesn't feel guilty. You keep saying, you need to feel guilty. And they're like, I don't feel guilty. I don't feel guilty. So, I mean, the means by which we preach to people need to change, but we keep playing out of the same playbook. And you know what? Somebody's drumming us. they're beating us. And we have not switched playbooks. I think the biggest thing here is that we need to recognize that when people ran from sin, because sin was inconvenient, it was uncomfortable, and I can just do what I want. So they got rid of this notion of anything being standard, any objections. It's not the reason they did. There's lots of reasons why we ran from sin. And we believe that there is no such thing as a standard, no such thing as a right or a wrong by which we are. It made it feel good because we're like, I can breathe easy now. I don't have to worry about, a God who might punish me for the things that I've done. But the problem is, in doing that, in denying a standard, we've ran in the opposite direction, which not having meaning means that if I can't do wrong, then I can't do right either. So nothing I do matters. Yeah. So I got rid of sin because it was the easy, convenient thing. And now my heart isn't being, judged by it anymore. But now nothing I do really is worthwhile. Nothing is meaningful. And I think that's who you have coming to your meetings. Those people who are coming to your meetings are saying, I don't have meaning. I don't like sin. I don't like the notion of sin. I don't like the notion of hell. But you're like, if things are meaningful, this is the thing, if things are meaningful, then it's possible that you can violate the meaning you were given, that it's possible that you aren't living up to the standard by which you were created for. That's uncomfortable. It's inconvenient. But what would you rather have? No sin, no meaning. It's one or the other.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's really good. That's really good. And it's really true. Because that has been, so, Jordan sort of sees meaning as an internal gyroscope to help people say, okay, this is the direction you should go in, because you should go in a direction. The meaning crisis, another scholar, Vervaeke, that, I've done some commenting on his work too. The craziest thing that I saw was that people would call me and they would tell me I was depressed. And then I watched these videos and I wasn't depressed anymore. And I started doing things. And it's like, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then the craziest thing was, and this is part of the reason why I really wanted to study Jordan, because he was doing something I wasn't doing, was that people would say, now I want to read the Bible. Now I want to go to church. And it's like, after watching this guy, that's what you want? That's interesting. What's happening here? So
yeah, it's and like I said, people are waking up to go, wait, there's meaning out there, objective meaning. There's something out there that I've completely they just shut themselves off. And I think the connection between those ideas, between everyone gets a trophy, everyone's getting a trophy, and the idea that you don't have any meaning, and that the connection between those things are the same thing, even though there's my lack of compartmentalization, but the connection between those are one and the same. So if I give everybody gets an award, then really there is no,
the reward is meaningless.
The reward is meaningless.
Yeah.
You have no value, and then we look at Groundhog's Day, and that's the world of Phil. Waking up each day to the same day, that doesn't mean a thing. So he's going to live like he wants to, but even that, there's no fulfillment. And really all he wants is to be fulfilled. All he wants is to be happy. And you can't have happiness without the feeling that something around there is wrong, that you've got to get right.
Yeah.
So
It's true. It's true.
Anyway, I hope the best for you, brother. I feel for you. We went to a small church for a long time, and I feel the pain. I feel the pain for you.
I feel that pain sometimes, but I also feel enormously blessed. And at least so far, God has, the lights are on. The church has never missed a paycheck, which
That's
obviously
good.
is a good thing.
That's a plus, man.
And so what God does with his church, that's God's business. And I'm going to try to, do what he calls me to do. And we'll let God worry about what comes. So
That's right. Yeah, well, I've become much more a Calvinist in my later years than I was in my early ones.
Calvinist is the tradition for those who know they've failed.
Yeah.
Because what they got left. Well, if it's up to me, I know how that's going to go. So
yeah, that's true. It's so true. It's so true, but it's so good. So I think of Calvinism. I think at the end of Castaway, and where Tom Hanks arrives at all those different the crossroads. He looks down this road and this road, and this road. Well, you know which road he's going to take. He's not going to Canada, right?
Yeah.
But he stands out in the middle of it after he saw the girl driving back the opposite way, and he's going after her. Yeah. But I think what is in his mind. I think what is in his mind is, how did every road I take lead me to this? And I think that's the more safety in like going, all of the bad things that happened to him, all of the things that went wrong, he now recognizes and stands right in the middle of where he knows he needs to be, rather than saying, which way should I go? Because that's the Arminian perspective. I got to do something right. He recognizes that every path that he would have walked would have led him to this.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's a comforting feeling.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Matt. This has been a delight.
Yeah, it's been good talking with you, Paul. I really did enjoy it. I'm going to, so appreciate you.
Keep doing what you're doing, because
I am. I'm not giving up. I've got, like I said, I've got ideas. I just got to, I'm just thankful for where my channel's at. And I'm so blessed and so richly blessed. That's not robbing me of wanting me to do more. It's just inspire me to, man, I got to keep doing something even better, because I'm very blessed, very blessed.
All right.
So,
well, you have a wonderful day.
All right. You too, sir.
Take care, Matt.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.